Welcome everyone. Today in another podcast of Historiated Gora. Today uh, Abhishek Chakraborty is present uh, in this podcast, and Abhishek sir has a tremendous career, and he is a gold medalist. Uh, he is a gold medalist in Calcutta University in M.Sc Applied Physics, and he had done his PhD from Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta, on APM operational management, and we are very much obliged that he came here and gave his time for talking on these issues. So, uh, first of all, thanks a lot, sir, that you came.
Thank you.
And uh, my first uh, question would be that. What is we talk about freight equalization policy, and Eastern India was not treated equally, and many things are often raised by many political parties, including CPIA, TMC, or uh, many more. So we would like to know what is freight equalization policy and how it originated.
Okay. So, before I could start explaining, let's
Should
start
I share the
understanding.
slide?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
If I ask you to share some graphics, only then you can share them. Because there are some graphics also, and it will be easier for me if I start explaining through those graphics. Anyways, let's come to the main point. Now, before we could start explaining what is freight equalization policy, first try to address why there has been so much of debate around it. Now, recently, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, our Union Minister, he made a statement regarding. Okay, so we often hear a debate that it is the southern states which are feeding the northern states. Whatever tax revenue that has been collected, the southern states typically get only a smaller share, whereas the northern states get a larger share, and that has been a bone of contention between the northern and the southern states. And this is something very well known to us. Now, during the 15th Finance Commission, a proposal was supposed to be made that the tax devolution to the Indian states should be happening on the basis of 2011 census and not the 1971 census. Now, this is something which is debatable. Why? The moment we look into the 2011 census for tax devolution to the Indian states, what we could notice that over these 40 years, the share of population of the southern states have further declined, and that could lead to them getting even a lower share, and that is why there has been so much of a debate. Now, there has been certain comments being made by some South Indian politicians that sparked the controversy of separation from the Indian Union. As a response to that, recently Union Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar made a comment that over the period of time, especially between 1950s to 1990s, because of the freight equalization policy, the southern Indian states ended up uh, becoming more and more prominent destination of economic activities. And despite the northern states like Bihar, West Bengal, Odisha, which has huge amount of mineral resources, were at the back. Now, this has been pondered us to look beyond those statements being made. Those statements are political, but then there is also economics behind it. So let's try to understand what has been this trade equalization policy. So, welcome to this live streaming. And again, I would like to thank Jyotishman to provide me with this opportunity to present whatever my views have been around this topic of trade equalization policy. Now, trade equalization policy explains the poor economic growth of certain Indian states which have been traditionally rich in terms of the mineral resources. Having said that, as I already told you regarding the comments made by Rajabazar, let's first try to understand how the financial devolution has been happening among Indian states. What we could notice from a graphics, if you could go to the next slide, there is a graphic on financial devolution. If you could go to that slide, yes. Now here, if you could see, for every rupee of tax being contributed by certain states like Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Haryana, they are only getting 8%, 15%, and 18% in return. Whereas, if you look at the states, particularly UP and Bihar, they get a huge proportion of every amount, every rupee of tax that is being collected. And that has been the bone of contention. As I mentioned earlier, that if the 15th Finance Commission recommendations included to consider the 2011 census, it is obvious that Bihar, UP, and other North Indian states would be getting even a greater share. And that is where the entire debate today is focusing on. Go to the next slide. Now, let us look as to how the mineral in India has been distributed across Indian states. What we could see, that it is primarily concentrated in the states of Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Karnataka, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra. Whereas the remaining Indian states only hold a very minuscule proportion. Though this list doesn't include West Bengal, but then West Bengal also includes huge coal reserves, which are also quite useful in the development of the core industries. Go to the next slide. Here is another interesting finding. Ideally, the mineral rich states should be doing better in terms of their economic progress and also in terms of developing their human development index. But look at their position. If I look at the GSDP per capita, which is being used for measuring the economic progress of any state, what we could notice that most of these mineral rich states are lagging behind their Indian peers. This is also true for HDI. Out of 35 states, look at the ranks of Madhya Pradesh and Jharkhand, also Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh. Ideally, these states, given their mineral wealth, they should be up in the ladder. But then it also pushes us to think that is there any connection between industrial activity and GSDP as well as HDI? Because remember, if you notice the industrial activity in these states, it is also lagging. I mean, in most of the states, I mean, though we have Maharashtra and Karnataka excelling in terms of industrial growth. Go to the next slide. Now, here is an interesting finding that industrial development is indeed an essential part to improve the GDP. Now here, on one axis, I'm plotting GDP per capita, and on the other axis, what has been the share of industrial activity in GDP. What you could notice, there is near perfect correlation, except there are certain exceptions, like the most developed countries, United States, Japan, Singapore, etc. But largely, what we could see, there is a correlation in terms of the share of industry in terms of the GDP and the GDP per capita, which again pushes us to think that is the lack of industrial development a key issue in the lower GSDP of the mineral rich Indian states. If I again look beyond this and try to see how these things are related to HDI, just go to the next slide. Here again, what I would see, that even if I look at the manufacturing value added, that means which captures my industrial activity, there is again a good correlation, good positive correlation between MVA per capita and Human Development Index, which means had the industrial development been proper in most of these mineral rich states, they would have improved upon their HDI as well as GSDP. But then, despite them being mineral rich, the economic activity in these states are limited only with a few exceptions. And this pushes us to think what has been the reason of poor economic as well as poor socio-economic performances of these mineral rich states. And the answer to this is the freight equalization policy. Though freight equalization policy is not the only reason that can describe why these states have been doing poorly, there may be some other reasons too, like maybe absence of a conducive political environment in the states, which has also played a part in the past, and that has taken away a lot of these uh, companies to move out of the state. But then let's not debate on those political issues. Let's only try to focus on how trade equalization policy has really affected the growth of a lot of these things. Now, before we move to trade equalization policy, let's start understanding that if I have to set up a manufacturing unit, a large enough manufacturing unit, what are the different factors I need to take into consideration while setting it up? The first and the foremost thing is I will be looking my manufacturing unit to be located at such a place where I will be having proximity to the source of raw materials. The raw materials that typically drive the growth of many industries during those days have primarily been considered as included as coal, iron ore, bauxite, etc. And if you carefully observe, the concentration of the availability of these resources have primarily been Odisha, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, some part of West Bengal, etc. Now, what could be the other prominent characteristics of a location that could bring in firms to invest? The other thing is, how has my infrastructure been developed? Am I able to build up some kind of a spatial congregation of different industries, try to form a cluster, etc., etc. So, but the most prominent reasons that would drive the start of any industrial unit at a place include the proximity to the source of raw materials and the proximity to the markets. And by markets, during that context, I mean how close your factories are to the ports. I will explain that later. So, in 1952, I mean, actually, the years are a bit debatable. In certain cases, I read it is 1956. Perhaps the policy, etc., was enacted in 1952 and then implemented as a part of the second 5-year plan. But then let's not get into that kind of a debate. I mean, when exactly it originated. But why it originated? So the argument in favor of this trade equalization policy was that look, there are many Indian states which are far from the sources of raw materials. And as a result, there could be an unbalanced economic activity in favor of certain regions as compared to the other regions. The government during those days feared this. But then, was it a prudent decision? That's what we are going to debate. So, what is this trade equalization policy? During those days, most of the freight used to be carried through railways. Railways, as you know, have been controlled by government since then. So government decided that it might not be a good decision for a firm to establish itself at a place which is far away from the source of raw material. And because of that, government thought that perhaps we could be subsidizing the transportation cost so that the competitive advantage that Jharkhand, Odisha, Bengal, even Bihar, Madhya Pradesh used to enjoy during those days, that could be neutralized. And that is where government started providing subsidy to a lot of these industrial units that would like to set it up at different locations. But then the reason is freight equalization policy that bad, and how it originated in a global way? So I found one particular reference of a 1948 paper. It is by A.W. Curie, and the paper's title is Free Trades and Regionalism. This is the first instance of a published paper what is available in the public domain. And this particular paper argues that look, on a smaller scale, especially in Canada, this freight equalization policy started yielding good enough dividends. Now, the paper mentions that way back in 1888, there has been certain instances when governments implemented this freight equalization policy for the development of some far off places. And this Canadian National Transportation Policy, which enacted in 1967, basically came as a consequence of those success stories. But before that, it was India that implemented it, though it is doubtful whether that particular success story of 1888 uh, played some kind of a role in India enacting this kind of a scheme. Now the question arises why a country should be going ahead with this kind of a policy. If a country is large enough, like Canada, which is 3 times as large as India in terms of area, it may not be possible for such a large country in terms of its geographical area to develop industries at each and every nook and corner of the country. Further, there may be problems with the geographical terrain. India also has this problem of geographical terrain. If you look at the case of Northeast, or let's say Himalayas and North, Jammu Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, even Uttarakhand, these places could have been left out. But then the role that equalization policy played was has nothing to do with development of these places, but rather it developed some other places at the cost of the mineral rich space. Right? So I hope this idea of free equalization policy is clear to all of you.
So, sir, there is a question in my mind, especially in many occasions, we see that the current ruling party of West Bengal, they raise the issues of freight equalization policy,
Hmm.
and it is also raised, also used to be raised by CPIM rule. During the
Hmm.
CPIM, they also used to raise this question that
Hmm.
this policy affects Bengal drastically.
Yes,
So we would like to know how this policy affected the eastern states and especially Bengal.
yes, that's what I'm explaining. Now, first of all, as I told you earlier, that look, whenever I have to set up a manufacturing unit, I will first look into the proximity of raw materials. Secondly, I would also look into how close I am to the ports. These are the two major factors that I will be looking at. Now, let's go back to the last slide. Yes. In 1952, India had five major ports: the Kolkata port, the Vizag port, Mumbai port, Chennai port, and the Cochin port. If you look at the geographical locations of these ports, only Kolkata is somewhat northwards that could cater to the requirements of, that could cater to the industrial requirements of companies that could be located in its proximity. The other four ports are down south. If you look at 1966, two more ports came up, the Kandla and the Paradip port. Though Paradip port could have played a very important role in the development of industrial clusters, but then by the time this port came up, it was a bit too late. 10 years later, two more ports came up again down south. What does it indicate? That if I have to set up a manufacturing unit, and since transportation of coal, iron and steel, as well as iron and steel and cement, these were subsidized. I can easily get iron and steel from a lot of these companies which are located in Jharkhand, in Chhattisgarh, and in Bengal. Remember, iron and steel is a very important component in the development of many other industries, right? It is used as one of the principal raw materials in many industries. So what has happened? Given iron and steel is being produced in a lot of these steel plants based out of these 3-4 states, in an ideal scenario, you would have expected a lot of the manufacturing units coming in the closer proximity to these. But then, since the transportation of iron and steel through railways was subsidized by the government, I have no incentive to set up my plant closer to these places. Rather, I would like to have better access to these ports, right? And that is why a lot of these economic activities started shifting southwards. So it is not only the freight equalization policy, it was also the location of the major ports. Together, these two things coupled up and dethroned the eastern states from their economic progress. Now, how it further affected, let me also explain that. Just go to 3 slides back, where I had shown two different Indian maps. Before that, yes.
Is that?
Yes, this one. Now, look at how the industrial activities used to take place in 1960. This is somewhere close to the when the freight equalization policy was enacted. Gujarat, Maharashtra, and West Bengal. These used to be the three most prominent centers of economic activity, followed by Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and Tamil Nadu. Right? Further, if you look at the source of raw materials, what I just now explained, you could see Bengal grew because it was closer to Jharkhand, Odisha, and Chhattisgarh as far as the access to raw materials was concerned. Kolkata port was also available, but then, though we keep on debating that Bengal's economy fell only because of this, I mean, it may be slightly doubtful. Maybe during those days, in terms of these core industries, Bengal's proximity both to the source of raw material as well as having Kolkata port, gave it a competitive edge over the others. Now, with the freight equalization policy, that competitive edge which Bengal used to enjoy alone, that got divided across multiple states, and that is why we could see a dip in Bengal's economic activity. But then Bihar, being a landlocked state, lost out. Go to the next slide, and this is again very, very critical. What has happened in due to this freight equalization policy? Now, if you could notice how the economic activity used to take place in the four prominent eastern states as compared to the three other states. If you look at the four eastern states, West Bengal, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, and Bihar, look how their logarithm of NSDP in terms of only manufacturing used to dominate the other three states of Punjab, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu. And by the time mid 70s came up, Bengal started losing out. So that part, late 1970s, ended up being very, very critical for Bengal, which clearly shows that though freight equalization policy has played a very, very critical role in lowering this output, perhaps the second thing which contributed was the change in the political landscape. Right? Just go to another slide. This is also very, very important. During 1950s, if you look at the share of Bengal and Bihar in terms of contributing towards the industries where iron and steel used to be prominent raw material, what you could see, they used to contribute close to 50% of those output. For the non in other industries, it still used to be as high as 33%. 1952 or 1956 rather was the point when the freight equalization policy was enacted. Since then, both Bengal and Bihar had seen a tremendous decline in both uh, form of industries where iron and steel is prominent, be used as a raw material, and where it is not. Which means, now here is a very important thing. If you look at the industrial output, primarily it was iron and steel driven. I, the moment we moved to freight equalization policy, the dip in terms of the industries which has iron and steel as a prominent input, what we could see the dip is very sharp. Though there has been a dip in other industries, but that dip is not sharp. The sharp dip only happened after 1967. Remember, it was also the time when Bengal witnessed a political change, and then there was political instability also. So again, I am not drawing any conclusions. I am only trying to pinpoint those timings. Right? So this is where states like Bengal, Odisha, Bihar lost out. One important slide, just come to the next one. In 1993, through a parliament ruling, this freight equalization policy was made null and void. Rather, the subsidy stopped, and nowadays we are not witnessing any such thing. But the question that still remains unanswered, this 40 years of in economic injustice done to the eastern states, are we in a better position to see the day of the light, see the light of the day? Answer is no. Why no? Let me again try to explain this. Now there is something called agglomeration externalities. The moment we set up a manufacturing unit, obviously around it a lot of other units will also come up. Over a period of time, the manufacturing unit can also grow in scale. It starts experiencing the benefits due to both economy of scale as well as economies of scope. Due to the proximity of a lot of firms, transportation costs will anyways go down. By 1970s came up, Japan was also facing an economic crisis, and that led to certain new principles of manufacturing, included just-in-time and lean manufacturing, which also pushed towards a certain kind of agglomeration, what we in Japanese language what we call keiretsus. Now, what happens in these keiretsus? Once there is a manufacturing unit, they are going to get their raw materials or sub-assemblies from a lot of other units. And then these units also would like to keep their inventory positions lean. As such, a lot of the firms which are supplying to these major firms start locating themselves in the closer proximity of the focal firm so that they could bring down the transportation cost and also reduce the inventory. Now, over a period of time, when this trade equalization policy was also in place, a lot of these Indian firms started moving towards or following this Japanese keiretsu models. Now, it is very difficult, even in the absence of the trade equalization policy, to create such a kind of keiretsu based model in those places which are yet to attract these kind of economic activity. So this is what we term as agglomeration externality, right? So even though 3 decades have gone past, we hardly could see much of an economic activity or rather industrial activity taking place in these regions. The other thing that could also be a prominent reason, post-economic liberalization, the share of the service sector in Indian economy has also been increasing. And maybe with the rise of service sector, many of these eastern states have attracting a lot of these service firms, right? Because for them, these kind of agglomeration externalities which were prominent in the context of manufacturing is not so prominent for services. So, if I have to conclude it, I would say that once these eastern Indian states used to be the cradle of economic activity. But because of this one particular issue, these states lost out. Even though that mistake was now being undone, but still, whatever things have happened in the past, it is very difficult to make these eastern states complete. So with this, I'm done with my presentation.
Okay, sir. One last question that is,
Mhm.
what do you think? Will this policy will be continued in future, and is it uh, implemented till now by the current government also?
So, if you, as I said, particulation policy remained only in 1993. Since then, there has also been a push towards uh, freight movement through roadways, right? I mean, if you notice, in 1990s, there was a push towards golden quadrilateral. Now, I mean, this is a very, very difficult question to answer because a lot of these decisions are also contingent on the kind of political environment that exists in a particular state. Once a state loses out in comparison to other states, it is obvious that for them to attract more investment becomes next to impossible. For instance, if you look at the case of Bangalore becoming an IT hub, right? Now, it's a chicken and egg problem. The moment Bangalore becomes an IT hub, obviously that particular place will start attracting a lot of engineering colleges. The moment there are more and more engineering colleges, obviously more and more companies will start coming. So it is like some kind of a vicious cycle which keep on reinforcing the other. So once a particular state gets a head start, it keeps on building its economic prowess. Some states which lose out, again, as I said, there is a vicious cycle. You do not know from where to start. If there is a political will, maybe people develop some kind of an inertia to bring, I mean, to play a pivotal role in assisting their governments to bring investments. So, I mean, it is very, very difficult to answer at this stage as to what is it is going to be. But then, if you notice the case of both Bengal and Odisha, both these states have started leaving all those, I mean, I would call a bad fortune behind, and these two states are getting a lot of investments in terms of development of IT related services. So maybe we have lost out in terms of manufacturing, but then we can still push ourselves to play a very, very crucial role in terms of making these states as future IT hubs. I think I
Okay,
saw
sir.
a question.
Okay, sir. We have reached at the end of at the brink of the ending.
Mhm.
So at the end, we used to have some question and answer session
Yes, yes.
of more than around 10 to 15 minutes. So if you are comfortable, I would take some
Yeah,
questions
I have
from the
seen these
audience.
questions. There is a question by Saptashi.
Yes,
The
yes,
question is, what are the ways in which the state regulations hamper industrial growth in these
yes,
states?
yes.
Uh, I can answer the first question. Okay, first let me answer this question. Why did this policy did not hamper Gujarat? Now you have to understand what kind of raw materials that Gujarat is providing for industries and what kind of industries that were prominent in Gujarat. So what my knowledge says, it is mainly textiles, right? It uses cotton. Cotton was kept out of regulation, and that is where Gujarat did suffer. I hope this answers Saptashi's question.
So we'll go to another. Uh,
First, let's go to the first question.
yes.
Okay, state regulations. Uh, Look, I mean, if you look at state regulations, I think the biggest hindrance what a state can create is in terms of not providing a strong political will, right? Now, I'm not very sure what are, I mean, how state can change these regulations sometimes back there used to be this concept of SEZ. I'm not very sure whether these SEZs are still that prominent. So the moment you have more and more of these SEZs, obviously you are able to bring more investments. So SEZ is one of the things that, but again, my doubt is whether it is under the purview of the state or under the purview of the central government to create these SEZs. Right. Uh, okay. The next question is an interesting question. Is freight regulation policy something to do with poor law and order? Not directly, but the moment this freight equalization policy came up, many of these states started losing out to other states. Once a state loses out to other states in terms of economic activity, obviously its economic growth also gets hampered. The moment there is hampering of economic growth, obviously it could lead to law and order problem, because remember, a lot of these law and order problems arise due to scarcity, right? There is a saying in Bengali, right? Uh, that some people ended up becoming bad either due to what we say as abhav or swabhav. So, this law and order problems, whatever ended up becoming prominent, it could be due to individuals lacking enough opportunities. Right?
Uh,
Next question I
there is
answered.
another question.
Okay.
Is Odisha? Yes, yes.
So yes, I mean they are doing well. First of all, there has been political stability for the past 2 decades or so. Secondly, I mean, if you go back and try to see, with political stability, you are able to attract a lot of investments. Now, remember in 2008, Bengal was also moving towards attracting a lot of these investments. But then we had also witnessed Singur and Mandila agitations. Now, if I am an investor, I would think twice to move to a state, because if I'm moving to such a state, I also need to first not only uh, take the ruling party into confidence, I also need to take the opposition parties into confidence. And remember, this did not only stop with Singhul and Nandigram. Recently, there was another issue related to some coal mine. I'm not
Devcha Pacha.
exact. Devja, yes. Again, now the ruling government is very much in favor of bringing in, but then we are seeing agitations from the opposition. So, political goodwill of a particular state plays a very, very critical role in bringing in investments. If you look at Odisha, largely the opposition as well as the ruling governments, they are on the same side when it comes to bringing in investments. Yes,
That is the question.
it's also a very, very important issue that you have to also bring in a lot of education institutions. But then, having said that, if you look at West Bengal has all the top-notch institutions. It has an IIT, it has an NIT, it has IZAR, IAEST, ISI, IIM. It is the only state, even triple IT. It is, remember, it is the only state to have all these prominent institutions. But then, if economic activities do not start taking, do not have a head start now, the same people will have to leave the state and take shelter in some other states to earn their livelihood.
Mm, I think there isn't any more questions. So Thanks a lot, sir. You came and gave us your precious time.
Okay, it was
And
also my pleasure
yes,
to
yes,
talk on a topic. Look, I'm not an economist, so but then I ended up talking on this particular subject, which is very close to my heart.
yes, yes.
Okay.
And very few people talk about this thing that, but they talk beneath the. I think they talk informally, but they doesn't want to put that in because if they put that in mainstream, so there would be questions on those political parties also, that what was your take on this topic.
Hmm.
So I think in the both side they uh, just do a type of blame game, but they don't want to put this in a plane.
Hmm.
So
Exactly.
I think law and
I
order
think I
problem.
answered the question, but then what he's
Yes.
asking, look, first, scarcity led to law and order leading to a lot of these investments or investors shying away from investing. That again leading to more scarcity will lead to more law and order. So as I said, vicious cycle.
Uh, okay, I think there isn't any more questions. So again, thanks a lot for coming, and I knew a lot of things throughout this conversation, and also our viewers also came to know a lot of things, and I think they have loved it. And I think we'll meet again
Yeah,
on
sure,
another
sure,
topic, another uh, issue.
sure.
So thanks a lot for coming. We're obliged that you came, and I hope we'll talk on another topic in another day in future. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching.